So how to remove a specific item from an array in JavaScript is a really common question for beginners, and as you can see from this Stack Overflow question, it's one of the most popular questions that's been asked on the site. Unfortunately, there isn't actually just one way that you can remove a specific item from an array in JavaScript. There's many different ways to do it, and as you can see from this question, there are actually 110 answers giving different ways and different thoughts on how to do it. So how do you know which is the best way to remove a specific item from an array in JavaScript? Well, in today's web dev tip, what we're going to do is take a look at a few different ways that you can do it, some of the more popular ways, and also which provides the most benefit in terms of performance. So let's go over to the JS Bench website, and I've set up a test suite with a specific array. It's very simple, it's just got a list of numbers in there. And what we're going to do is run through some of the different ways of getting a specific item removed from this array and find out which one is the best. Okay, so let's create some code blocks. Probably the first and most common way that's suggested to remove a specific item from an array is to first of all find the index of that item and then just use the splice function on the array, which will just remove one item from the array and actually change the original array as well. So let's do that by saying const index is equal to the array, which is basically the array that we created above, and say index of, let's remove the number 4, for example. And if we actually find that element, so if the index is bigger than -1, because the index of function will return -1 if it doesn't find anything, we then call the array.splice function and just pass in as the first argument the index, the position of the item, and we just want to remove one item, so we just pass in 1 as the second argument. So as I say, that's probably the most common way of doing it, and that is probably one of the most popular answers on that Stack Overflow question. So let's take a look at another way you could do it, and probably a more modern way of doing it, and it does offer a little bit more flexibility in terms of what we can do with it, which I'll explain in a moment. But we basically call the filter function on the array, which takes a function itself. So for each of those items in the array, if I does not equal 4, then actually we'll keep the item in the array, but if it does equal 4, then this will give us a false value, and the item will be removed. Now the problem with the filter function is it doesn't actually modify the original array, or you can see it as a problem in this instance. It's not a problem for most use cases. So we actually have to assign that to a new variable. So we do have the extra step of creating a new array and assigning the result of the filter function to that. So let's just quickly benchmark those two tests that we've got set up, and we'll just see which one is the preferred method out of the finding the index and then using the splice function or using the filter function. And as you can see, the first code block, which had the splice function in there, is actually performing a little bit faster, although there's not much in it. It's only about 10-15%. And that's probably due to the fact that we're actually looping over all of the items in the array using the filter function, so every item in the array has to be checked. And although I don't know how the index of function has been implemented, what will probably happen is when we hit the number 4, which is the fourth item in the array, then the actual function will stop. So it finishes a little bit earlier and saves some time. Okay, so let's add a couple more examples in here of how you can actually get an item out of an array. So let's add a third code block down here. So for this approach, what I'm going to do is do a similar thing in terms of getting the index of the item, but instead of using the index of function, I'm going to use find index, which is a newer method of finding an index of an item from an array. And again, we say for each of those items in there, we'll check if the item is equal to 4, which will give us the index value back. And then we'll just do the same thing again before. So if index is bigger than -1, we'll then use the array.splice function, pass in the index, and then pass in the value of 1 just to remove one item from the array. And whilst we're here, we'll add a final code block in here as well. But this time we're going to use the low-remove function. So in JS Bench, we've got low- available to us automatically. So underscore remove, and then we pass in the array as the first argument. And then it's a bit like a filter or a find index function, that it takes another function to do the matching. So we'll say for each item in there, is the item equal to 4? And if so, we'll remove that. And the low-remove function will actually mutate the array as well, so we don't need to reassign it to a new variable. Just make sure I've got a dot there to call the actual function. Okay, so we've got a couple of other different ways of actually removing a specific item from an array. Let's rerun the tests and we'll see this time which comes out as the most performant. Okay, so code block 3 was our winner this time. So don't forget that was the one with the find index function, the newer find index function. And still near the top as well is the first block with the index of function. And the code block for Lodash is actually performing better than our filter function. Again, I don't know how that's implemented under the hood. Potentially it might be using the splice function, so it might be very similar to our code block 1 and 3. But again, you can see the results there. They're all very similar. Probably only really version 2 using the filter function is the slowest. But again, that's probably down to how the filter function works, because we're looping through each item in the array and removing it if found. And as mentioned earlier, it does offer some additional flexibility because we can actually remove multiple items using this method. So where we've used our splice function, we can only really remove one item at a time. So if you are looking to remove more than one item from an array based on one or more conditions, then probably the filter function or using the remove function from the Lodash package, if you have that available, is your best option. So that's it for this tutorial. Stay tuned for more web dev tips.